Most women think attraction dies because a man changed. But psychology says something far more uncomfortable. Sometimes, obsession disappears the moment a woman unknowingly destroys the emotional tension that made him addicted in the first place. Not with betrayal, not with toxicity, but with subtle behaviors that silently rewire how he sees her value. The scary part? Most women never notice the exact moment it happens. Because men rarely announce when fascination fades, they simply stop chasing, stop wondering, stop emotionally investing. Tonight, we're uncovering the 9 hidden mistakes that instantly kill a man's obsession, and the female psychology behind why these behaviors destroy attraction faster than rejection ever could. Have you ever noticed how some relationships don't end with a fight? They end with silence? No dramatic goodbye. No final explanation. Just a slow emotional disappearance that feels impossible to explain. One day, the attention fades. The excitement weakens. The obsession that once felt intense suddenly becomes distant, cold, and emotionally disconnected. And what's terrifying is that most people never realize what actually caused it. Human attraction is far less logical than people want to believe. Most connections are not built only on beauty, compatibility, or even love. They are built on emotional tension, uncertainty, curiosity, and the subconscious desire to keep discovering another person. The mind becomes attached to what it cannot fully predict. That's why obsession is rarely created by perfection. It's created by psychological engagement. One of the biggest mistakes many women unknowingly make is over-explaining every emotion they feel. At first, vulnerability creates intimacy. But when every thought, every fear, and every emotional reaction becomes immediately available, something strange happens inside the male mind. The mystery disappears. The emotional chase ends. There's nothing left to figure out. Psychology has always shown that people become deeply attached to what stimulates curiosity. The moment someone becomes emotionally transparent to the point of predictability, attraction slowly shifts into familiarity. And familiarity, when excessive, often weakens fascination. What many people don't understand is that attraction feeds on emotional spacing, not games, not manipulation, but healthy emotional distance that allows the brain to anticipate someone's presence instead of constantly consuming it. When a woman becomes permanently available, replying instantly every time, sacrificing her routines, abandoning her individuality, and emotionally revolving around one person, the relationship unconsciously loses tension. The brain stops releasing the same emotional dopamine that uncertainty once created. Predictability may feel safe, but psychologically, too much predictability often kills excitement. And this is where another hidden mistake appears: constant reassurance seeking. Repeatedly asking questions like, "Do you still love me?" Or "Are you losing feelings?" may sound harmless, but over time it creates emotional fatigue. Not because reassurance itself is bad, but because the subconscious mind begins associating the relationship with pressure instead of emotional freedom. Attraction cannot survive where someone feels constantly responsible for regulating another person's self-worth. Eventually, admiration gets replaced by emotional exhaustion. The truth is, obsession is deeply connected to perceived value. And perceived value often decreases the moment someone abandons themselves emotionally. When a woman slowly makes a man the center of her identity, she unintentionally sends a dangerous psychological message: "My entire emotional world depends on you." At first, this may feel flattering to him, but eventually, it removes the very independence that once made her attractive. People are naturally drawn toward those who already have emotional purpose, personal direction, and inner stability. When someone sacrifices their individuality for attachment, attraction quietly weakens beneath the surface. Another dangerous illusion is confusing emotional intensity with genuine connection. Intensity can feel addictive. Late night conversations, emotional highs, constant texting, dramatic vulnerability, all of it creates stimulation. But stimulation is not always intimacy. Sometimes people become addicted to emotional chaos because it temporarily fills inner emptiness. And when the chaos settles, they realize there was never a deep foundation underneath it. Real connection is quieter, more grounded, less desperate. Obsession built only on emotional intensity usually burns fast and disappears just as quickly. There's also a psychological power in silence that most people completely underestimate. Silence creates space for imagination, space for reflection, space for emotional processing. But modern relationships are often drowning in constant communication. Every moment is documented, explained, shared, and exposed. There's no absence left to trigger anticipation. No room left for someone to wonder, miss, or emotionally crave your energy. And the human mind values what it occasionally has to emotionally reach for. When someone is endlessly available, psychologically they become emotionally normalized. What's fascinating is that many women believe attraction dies because they cared too much. But the deeper truth is more uncomfortable than that. Attraction often dies when self-respect quietly disappears beneath emotional attachment. When fear of losing someone becomes stronger than the desire to remain emotionally grounded. The moment someone starts performing for love instead of naturally experiencing it, the energy changes completely. People can subconsciously feel desperation, even when no words are spoken. And perhaps the darkest part of all this is that men rarely explain when fascination fades. Most don't consciously understand it themselves. They simply stop initiating, stop wondering, stop feeling emotionally stimulated in the same way. Because attraction is not controlled only by conscious decisions, it's heavily shaped by subconscious emotional experiences happening beneath awareness. The strongest relationships are never built on obsession alone. They are built on emotional balance. Two people choosing each other without emotionally collapsing into each other. Real attraction survives when both people maintain mystery, individuality, emotional control, and inner purpose outside the relationship itself. Because the moment someone loses themselves trying to keep another person emotionally attached, they often become less emotionally unforgettable in the process. And sometimes, the strongest attraction comes from the people who never beg to be chosen. Most people think attraction grows through constant presence. They believe the more available you become, the more secure the connection feels. So they reply instantly, clear their schedules, stay emotionally accessible at all hours, and slowly begin shaping their entire routine around one person. At first, it feels like love. It feels caring, loyal, devoted. But hidden beneath human psychology is a truth most people never notice until it's too late. The mind does not become obsessed with what feels endlessly available. It becomes emotionally stimulated by what creates anticipation. This is why so many relationships slowly lose intensity without any obvious reason. Nothing dramatic happened, no betrayal, no major fight, yet something silently changed in the emotional dynamic. The excitement weakened. The curiosity faded. Conversations started feeling routine instead of emotionally charged. And often, the real cause is excessive predictability. The human brain is deeply connected to reward patterns. Psychologists have long understood that uncertainty creates stronger emotional engagement than guaranteed outcomes. This is the same psychological principle behind addiction, social media dopamine cycles, and emotional attachment. The brain releases more anticipation when it cannot fully predict emotional rewards. That anticipation creates excitement, curiosity, emotional tension, and tension is one of the most powerful forces behind attraction. But when someone becomes completely predictable, the emotional system relaxes too much. There is no more wondering, no emotional buildup, no sense of anticipation. The relationship becomes emotionally safe in a way that slowly removes stimulation. And while safety is important for trust, too much emotional certainty without individuality often weakens fascination. Many women unknowingly destroy attraction, not because they love too much, but because they slowly erase all emotional space. They become permanently reachable. Every message gets an instant response. Every emotional reaction becomes immediate. Every free moment becomes dedicated to one person. Over time, this creates a dangerous subconscious message. You never have to emotionally work for my attention because it will always be available. And human beings rarely value what feels psychologically guaranteed. What makes this even more dangerous is that most people confuse availability with emotional closeness. But they are not the same thing. Emotional closeness is about connection, understanding, and emotional safety. Constant availability, however, can slowly turn someone from emotionally exciting into emotionally familiar. And familiarity without balance often kills intrigue. Think about the beginning of most relationships. The attraction feels intense because both people still have their own lives, routines, priorities, and emotional independence. There is space between interactions, space for wondering, space for imagination. The brain fills those spaces with emotional curiosity. That's why early attraction often feels electric. But then fear quietly enters. Fear of losing the connection, fear of seeming distant, fear of not being enough. And that fear causes people to overcompensate emotionally. They start giving more access, more attention, more reassurance, more availability, hoping it will strengthen the bond. But psychologically, too much access can reduce emotional excitement instead of increasing it. This does not mean someone should play manipulative games or intentionally create confusion. Healthy attraction is not about pretending to be unavailable. It's about maintaining a life that does not emotionally revolve around another person. The most attractive individuals are usually those who still protect their routines, goals, emotional control, and sense of self, even while deeply caring about someone. Because independence creates perceived value. When someone has passions, discipline, personal growth, emotional boundaries, and a life filled with meaning outside the relationship, their presence feels more powerful. Their attention feels intentional instead of automatic. And psychologically, intentional attention carries more emotional weight than constant attention. There is also another hidden reality people rarely discuss. Overavailability often comes from anxiety, not love. Sometimes people stay constantly accessible because they are terrified that distance will make someone lose interest. So they overtext, overexplain, overgive, and oversacrifice. But desperation has a psychological energy people can feel subconsciously. Even if no one says it aloud, emotional imbalance slowly changes how attraction is experienced. Strong attraction needs oxygen. It needs two complete individuals choosing each other, not two people emotionally depending on each other for identity. The moment someone abandons themselves trying to maintain closeness, they often lose the very energy that made them attractive in the first place. And this is why silence, space, and individuality matter more than most people realize. Not because distance creates love, but because healthy space allows desire to breathe. It allows appreciation to grow naturally. It gives the mind time to miss, reflect, and emotionally reconnect. The deepest attraction is never built through emotional overexposure. It is built through emotional balance. Because people rarely become obsessed with what is constantly available. They become attached to what continues to feel emotionally valuable. There is a moment in many relationships that almost nobody talks about. A quiet moment where love stops feeling light and slowly starts feeling heavy. Not because the feelings disappeared overnight, but because one person unknowingly turned the relationship into a constant search for reassurance. And what begins as a desire to feel loved can slowly become emotional pressure that silently drains attraction from the connection. At first, reassurance feels normal. Everyone wants to feel chosen. Everyone wants certainty that they matter. But when insecurity quietly takes control, something deeper begins happening beneath the surface. The relationship stops becoming a place of emotional connection and slowly turns into a place where one person feels responsible for constantly repairing the other person's fears. Questions start appearing more often. Do you still love me? Why are you acting different? Are you losing interest? Do you still find me attractive? Individually, these questions may seem harmless. But psychologically, repeated reassurance seeking changes the emotional atmosphere of a relationship. Because attraction thrives in emotional freedom, not emotional obligation. The human mind naturally moves toward what feels emotionally energizing and away from what feels emotionally draining. And when someone constantly seeks validation, the relationship slowly becomes associated with anxiety instead of emotional peace. The other person begins feeling less like a partner and more like an emotional caretaker. Over time, admiration quietly turns into exhaustion. What makes this dynamic dangerous is that the person seeking reassurance usually believes they are fighting for love. In reality, they are often fighting against their own inner fears. Fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough. And those fears create behaviors that unintentionally push the very person they are trying to hold on to further away. Psychology has always shown that confidence is emotionally magnetic because it creates safety. Not arrogance, not emotional coldness, but grounded self-worth. People feel naturally drawn toward those who do not constantly need external validation to feel emotionally stable. Because emotional stability creates calm energy, and calm energy feels safe to stay around. But insecurity creates the opposite effect. When someone constantly needs reassurance, the relationship begins revolving around emotional maintenance. Every delayed reply feels threatening. Every small change in tone feels suspicious. Every moment of distance feels personal. And the mind starts overanalyzing everything. This creates emotional tension that slowly suffocates natural connection. What many women don't realize is that men often stop explaining their emotional withdrawal because they don't fully understand it themselves. They simply begin feeling emotionally tired. Conversations feel heavier. Interactions feel less spontaneous. The relationship starts feeling like work instead of emotional escape. And attraction rarely survives in environments where someone feels psychologically trapped by another person's insecurities. The deeper issue is that reassurance only works temporarily when self-worth is missing internally. Someone can hear "I love you" 100 times, but if they secretly believe they are unlovable, the fear always returns. That's why reassurance becomes addictive. The emotional relief fades quickly, forcing the person to seek more validation again and again. It becomes an endless cycle, and this is where many relationships quietly collapse. Because genuine attraction cannot grow inside emotional desperation. The more someone chases certainty, the more emotionally unstable they often appear. And instability creates subconscious discomfort. Human beings are naturally attracted to emotional strength because it signals security, control, and inner balance. This does not mean people should hide emotions or pretend not to care. Real vulnerability is powerful. But there is a difference between expressing emotions and emotionally depending on another person to constantly regulate your self-worth. Healthy relationships involve reassurance sometimes. Unhealthy dynamics require reassurance constantly. One of the most attractive qualities a person can have is emotional self-control. The ability to experience uncertainty without immediately panicking. The ability to remain grounded without demanding constant proof of love. Because emotionally secure people understand something insecure people often forget. Real connection cannot survive under pressure. The strongest individuals are not the ones who never fear losing someone. They are the ones who refuse to abandon themselves because of that fear. And strangely, that emotional stability often creates deeper attraction than endless affection ever could. Because when someone feels emotionally whole on their own, their love feels like a choice instead of a desperate need. People are drawn toward those who bring peace into their lives, not emotional chaos disguised as love. And sometimes, the moment someone stops begging for reassurance is the moment they finally become emotionally unforgettable. One of the most dangerous things that can happen in a relationship does not happen during betrayal, arguments, or heartbreak. It happens quietly, slowly, almost invisibly. It begins the moment a person starts losing their identity inside their attachment to someone else. At first, it never feels unhealthy. It feels romantic. A woman starts prioritizing him more, rearranging her schedule for him, thinking about him constantly, slowly disconnecting from hobbies, friendships, routines, and personal goals because the relationship becomes her emotional center. She tells herself this is love. That sacrificing parts of herself proves loyalty. But beneath the surface, human psychology reacts to this in a completely different way. People are naturally attracted to those who have a strong sense of self, not because independence is cold, but because individuality creates emotional gravity. When someone has passions, discipline, purpose, boundaries, and emotional control, their presence feels valuable. They radiate a life that exists beyond the relationship. And psychologically, that creates attraction because it signals emotional strength. But the moment someone makes another person their entire emotional world, something begins changing in the dynamic. The relationship stops feeling like two complete individuals choosing each other and starts feeling like one person emotionally depending on the other for identity. And dependency, when it becomes too strong, often weakens fascination. Many women never notice when this shift begins happening. It starts subtly. She stops spending time on herself because she wants more time with him. She slowly loses emotional connection with her own goals because the relationship consumes most of her attention. Her happiness becomes completely tied to his mood, his texts, his validation, his presence. Without realizing it, she starts emotionally orbiting around him. And while this level of devotion may seem flattering in the beginning, it often creates a subconscious imbalance over time. Because human beings value what appears emotionally stable and self-sufficient. When someone completely abandons themselves for love, they unintentionally communicate something dangerous. My emotional identity depends on you. And that pressure slowly changes how attraction is experienced. The truth most people avoid is that obsession often disappears the moment admiration gets replaced by responsibility. When a man feels like he has become the only source of a woman's emotional fulfillment, the connection can start feeling heavy instead of exciting. Not because he hates closeness, but because too much emotional dependence removes the freedom that attraction needs to breathe. Psychologically, people are drawn toward energy that feels complete, not energy that feels emotionally starving. This is why confidence is attractive. This is why ambition is attractive. This is why people with purpose naturally hold attention without forcing it. Their identity remains intact even while loving someone deeply. But when someone sacrifices their individuality for attachment, they slowly become emotionally predictable. There is no mystery left. No personal world left to explore. No emotional independence left to admire. Everything begins revolving around the relationship itself. And ironically, the harder someone tries to hold on to love by abandoning themselves, the faster attraction often fades. There's also another painful truth hidden inside this dynamic. People lose respect for what loses respect for itself. Not consciously, subconsciously. When someone tolerates neglect, constantly over-sacrifices, ignores their own needs, and emotionally shrinks themselves to avoid losing another person, it changes the emotional balance completely. The relationship begins operating from fear instead of mutual admiration, and fear-based attachment is exhausting. This is why emotionally healthy relationships require separation between identity and connection. Love should add to your life, not replace your life. The strongest couples are not the ones who lose themselves in each other completely. They are the ones who maintain individuality while still building intimacy together. A woman becomes far more emotionally unforgettable when she continues evolving, growing, learning, and protecting her sense of self even while deeply in love. Because mystery does not come from manipulation. It comes from depth, from having an inner world that cannot be completely consumed by another person. And the reality is, people are far more attracted to someone who chooses them while still having a full identity than someone who abandons everything just to keep them. Because real attraction is not built on emotional dependency. It's built on two people who know who they are before they ever choose each other. And the moment someone remembers their own value again, the entire energy of the relationship changes. One of the most misunderstood dynamics in attraction is the difference between emotional intensity and real connection. At the beginning of many relationships, everything feels powerful, overwhelming, and almost addictive. Late night conversations that go on for hours, constant checking of messages, emotional highs followed by sudden lows. It feels like chemistry. It feels like fate. But psychology reveals a deeper truth. Intensity is not always depth, and stimulation is not always stability. Human beings are naturally drawn to emotional stimulation. The brain reacts strongly to unpredictability, novelty, and emotional spikes because they trigger dopamine responses. That is why the early stages of attraction often feel so powerful. Every message feels exciting. Every reply feels meaningful. Every moment of attention feels amplified. But what feels like deep connection is sometimes just heightened emotional activation. The danger begins when intensity is mistaken for stability, because emotional intensity can exist even in unhealthy dynamics. In fact, some of the strongest emotional highs come from inconsistency, confusion, and uncertainty. When someone is not fully predictable, the mind starts chasing answers. When attention is inconsistent, the brain becomes more focused on receiving it. When emotional availability fluctuates, attachment can become stronger, not because the bond is healthy, but because the mind is trying to resolve uncertainty. This is where many women unknowingly fall into a psychological trap. They believe that because the emotions feel strong, the relationship must be real and deep. So they invest more, open more, attach more, without realizing that they may be building attachment on emotional volatility instead of genuine understanding. Real connection, however, feels different. It is not chaotic. It is not constantly high and low. It is grounded, stable, predictable in a comforting way. And because it lacks emotional chaos, it can sometimes feel less exciting in the beginning. But over time, it becomes stronger, deeper, and more sustainable. The human nervous system is not designed to live in constant emotional spikes. Eventually, the brain starts to normalize intensity, and what once felt exciting begins to feel exhausting. This is why relationships built purely on emotional highs often burn fast and fade quickly. The initial addiction cannot be sustained forever. Psychology also shows that emotional intensity often fills internal gaps. People who are carrying unresolved emotional needs, loneliness, or insecurity can become more drawn to intense connections because they temporarily fill emotional emptiness. The highs feel like relief. The attention feels like validation. The connection feels like escape. But when the intensity settles, the underlying emptiness returns. And that is when confusion begins. Why did it feel so strong at the start? Where did the connection go? Did I do something wrong? But in reality, nothing suddenly disappeared. It was never stable to begin with. It was amplified emotional stimulation, not rooted emotional compatibility. This is why emotionally mature attraction is often quieter at the beginning. It does not overwhelm the nervous system. It does not rely on emotional chaos to feel real. Instead, it grows slowly through consistency, respect, understanding, and emotional safety. It may not feel addictive at first, but it builds something far more powerful: trust. And trust is what transforms attraction into lasting connection. Another hidden psychological truth is that emotional intensity can sometimes mask incompatibility. When emotions are extremely strong, people overlook red flags, ignore inconsistencies, and rationalize behavior they would normally question. Because the emotional high creates a kind of tunnel vision. Everything feels meaningful, even when it may not be aligned. But when the intensity fades, reality becomes clearer. This is when many people realize they were attached to how the connection made them feel, not necessarily to who the person truly was in their everyday consistency. The most stable relationships are not built on emotional extremes. They are built on emotional balance, on communication that feels steady, on presence that feels consistent, on love that does not require confusion to stay alive. Because real connection does not need emotional chaos to survive. It grows in clarity, it strengthens in peace, and it deepens in stability. And when the mind finally stops chasing intensity, it starts recognizing something far more valuable: emotional truth. One of the most overlooked forces in attraction is not what you do, but what you don't do. In a world where constant communication has become normal, silence has lost its value. Yet, psychologically, silence is one of the strongest tools that shapes emotional anticipation, curiosity, and desire. Not silence used as a game, but silence as natural space, space that allows emotions to breathe instead of suffocate. At the beginning of attraction, there is always distance, not just physical but emotional spacing. People don't have full access to each other's lives. They don't know every thought, every moment, every reaction. And because of that, the mind fills in the gaps. It imagines, it wonders, it anticipates. That anticipation creates emotional energy, and that energy often feels like attraction itself. But as connection grows, many people unknowingly eliminate that space. Constant texting, constant updates, constant presence. Every moment becomes shared, every emotion becomes expressed immediately, every gap becomes filled with communication. And slowly, something shifts inside the psychological system of attraction. When nothing is left unknown, nothing is left to anticipate. And without anticipation, emotional desire begins to fade. The human mind is designed to respond strongly to absence, not because absence creates love, but because absence activates imagination. When someone is not always available, the brain begins to process their value differently. It starts to reflect, to miss, to reconsider, to emotionally project meaning into their absence. That internal processing is what often deepens attraction. But when presence becomes constant, the mind no longer has space to do that work. Everything becomes normalized. Everything becomes expected. And what is expected is rarely emotionally stimulating.